Welcome to the Criminal Imagination. This series, Crime and Civilization, begins with a simple question. What if the true purpose of law is not justice but control? Across centuries, crime fiction has recorded the political fears of its age, from cursed kings and cunning thieves to corrupt judges and silent witnesses. Each episode investigates how power operates through a narrative, what it hides, who it condemns, and what happens when the system turns inward and begins to devour itself. Today, we enter the glittering, gaslit corridors of a Victorian sensation novel that sold faster than Dickens and shocked the nation. Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. But this isn't just a story of adultery and attempted murder. It is a forensic investigation into how femininity, madness, and criminality were weaponized by the Victorian state, and how fiction itself becomes a part of the legal machinery used to control women. Published in 1862, Lady Audley's Secret was a literary phenomenon. Sensation novels, often dismissed as lurid or vulgar, were in fact deeply political. They turned domestic space into crime scenes, housewives into suspects, and marriage into a trap. Mary Elizabeth Braddon, herself a woman living unconventionally as an unmarried partner of a publisher, created in Lady Audley one of the Victorian fiction's most subversive figures. A beautiful upper-class woman who commits bigamy, lies about her identity, attempts to murder her first husband, and most dangerously, refuses to feel guilt. But the story of Lady Audley is more than personal drama. It unfolds at the intersection of legal reform, expanding empire, industrial capitalism, and the rise of psychiatric institutions. The mid-nineteenth century saw the consolidation of the asylum system and the professionalization of psychiatry, both of which were closely entangled with patriarchal authority and class discipline. Lady Audley does not just threaten her family, she threatens the ideological scaffolding of Victorian England. She is, in short, a legal crisis in petticoats. In the novel, Lady Audley is described as doll-like, angelic, fragile, almost absurdly feminine, golden hair delicately framed with a musical laugh and childlike innocence. But beneath this artificial glow lies calculated deceit. The novel hinges on the revelation that she is not Lucy Graham, the innocent governess who married into wealth, but Helen Talboys, a working-class woman who faked her death, abandoned her child, and reinvented herself. This duality, angel and demon, wife and criminal, is central to Victorian anxieties. Women were expected to embody moral virtue in the home, but Lady Audley performs femininity as a mask, a costume she weaponizes. She uses beauty as power, disrupting the assumption that the domestic woman is naturally passive, docile, and good. This is not a rebellion in the modern feminist sense. Lady Audley is not claiming equality. She is using the only tools she has in a system designed to deny her agency: beauty, manipulation, and performance. And that performance works until it becomes too convincing. Lady Audley does not simply trick people, she destabilizes the very definition of truth. If femininity is a role, then how does one distinguish between sincere virtue and practiced deception? This is the novel's true crime, the possibility that a woman can embody all the signs of innocence and yet be guilty. When Lady Audley is finally confronted by Robert Audley, her accuser an amateur detective. The question is not merely did she commit a crime, but is she sane? This is a legal question. Under the MacNaughton rules established in 1843, a person could not be held criminally responsible if they were deemed incapable of understanding the nature of their act due to insanity. It was a loophole, but one with political implications. Lady Audley is never formally tried. Instead, she is declared mad and quietly removed to a private asylum in Belgium. This is not justice, it is disappearance. The state, unable to prosecute a woman of her class and beauty without destabilizing its own moral codes, reclassifies her as insane. Here we must pause and reflect. The asylum becomes a legal fiction, a mechanism for preserving order without exposing the contradictions within the law. If Lady Audley were tried, the court would have to confront the possibility that a respectable lady could plan and attempt murder, that the domestic angel could be a devil, that the very structure of Victorian morality was built on sand. So instead, the system folds her into silence. We must also consider the novel's gendered asymmetries in relation to empire and class. George Talboys, Lady Audley's abandoned husband, returns from Australia, a colony that in Victorian imagination is associated with brutality, gold, and the dangerous reformation of class identity. George is presumed dead, then violently disappears again, this time almost permanently when Lady Audley pushes him into a well. He survives, but the point is clear. Men who go to the colonies return unrecognizable. Colonialism in this narrative is a space of class flux, gender disruption, and unstable identity. Lady Audley erases George because he threatens her class ascent. His return would expose her bigamy, her fraud, and her working class origins. She has married into the aristocracy, and George represents the ghost of poverty, labor, and domestic obligation. In this way, Lady Audley is not only a criminal but also an economic actor. Her crimes are entangled with Victorian class mobility, inheritance law, and the brutal economics of marriage as property transfer. She is attempting not just to escape the past, but to purchase a future. And yet, her removal to the asylum is also a reminder that the state's protection of class order overrides any sympathy for ambition. She is too beautiful to hang, but too dangerous to live free. Robert Audley is a curious detective, hesitant, reluctant, and plagued by moral qualms. He is not a policeman, he is a barrister, and thus a figure of the law, but he is not its enforcer. His role in the novel is ideological. He must restore domestic order, preserve the Audley name, and ensure that scandal is contained. But he is also the narrative surrogate for the reader, a figure who uncovers secrets, questions appearances, and ultimately must decide what justice looks like. What is striking, however, is that Robert does not seek legal punishment. He seeks silence. He arranges for Lady Audley's removal to Belgium, ensures that George is alive but hidden, and orchestrates a marriage between himself and another character, Clara Talboys, as if to ritually repair the narrative wound. Justice in Lady Audley's Secret is not retributive, it's performative. The goal is not to punish but to erase. The legal system functions not by prosecution but by redirection. The criminal woman is labeled insane, the damaged man is hidden, and the patriarch marries the good sister, restoring the fiction of domestic virtue. This is Victorian law as spectacle, a system that maintains order not by confronting crime but by concealing its most troubling truths. So, what does it mean to be declared insane in a novel like this? Madness in Victorian fiction often operates as a metaphor, but it is also an institution. The asylum is not just a building, it is a legal category that suspends ordinary rights. It is a space where inconvenient women could be disappeared, often on the testimony of a husband or a father. Lady Audley is not mad in any clinical sense. She is cold, calculating, and rational. But because she transgresses gender norms, the only available label is madness. This is not a medical diagnosis, it is a legal fiction. This strategy reflects the state's need to contain deviance within familiar categories. If a woman acts violently, she must be mad. If she is not mad, then the entire ideology of separate spheres of moral women and rational men collapses. So madness becomes the legal alibi for a society unwilling to see women as political agents. Lady Audley's story is not about insanity. It is about the uses of psychiatry as a mechanism of gender control. When Lady Audley's Secret was published, it was not merely a book, it was an event. Sensation novels were the tabloid journalism of their day, read by clerks, aristocrats, and housewives alike. They blurred the line between fiction and fact, story and scandal. Braddon herself was accused of corrupting morals, of glamorizing crime. But her novel does the opposite. It exposes how morality is manufactured. By making the domestic space a site of danger, Braddon undermines the ideology of the separate spheres. The home is not safe. Marriage is not sacred. Femininity is not innocent, and most radically, beauty is not truth. The media coverage of women like Constance Kent or Madeline Smith, real-life Victorian murderesses, was often framed through the same lens. They were mad or bad. Were they victims of passion or criminal masterminds? These questions were never really about guilt. They were about spectacle. The Victorian state, like the novel, used crime stories to teach moral lessons about obedience, gender, class, and desire. Lady Audley becomes a cipher, a canvas onto which a society projects its deepest fears: the femme fatale, the working class climber, the woman who refuses her assigned role. By the end of the novel, all secrets are resolved, but nothing is truly confronted. Lady Audley vanishes. Her child is never reclaimed. Her madness is a convenience. Her crimes are absorbed into the silence of a distant institution. This is not an aberration, it is a mirror. Victorian law, psychiatry, and domestic ideology collude to render women legible only through approved categories: mother, wife, whore, madwoman. Any deviation becomes a threat to state order. In this sense, Lady Audley's Secret is not just a story of crime, it is a story about the limits of what woman is allowed to be. Braddon shows us that beneath every fiction of femininity lies a system of surveillance, classification, and institutional force. And the greatest secret is not Lady Audley's name, it is the machinery that made her necessary. Lady Audley's secret is not simply a mystery, it is a meditation on the limits of legality, the plasticity of identity, and the state's need to classify dissent. Lady Audley is not a villain, she is a symptom. She reflects the Victorian fear that beneath the polished surfaces of empire and etiquette, there might be women who see too clearly, want too much, and act too independently. And so they must be declared insane, not to protect the public, but to protect the narrative. As we have seen, Braddon's novel becomes a kind of legal document itself, recording the social mechanisms that decide who counts as criminal, who gets to speak, and who must disappear. So let me leave you with a question. What happens when beauty becomes dangerous and truth becomes a threat to the legal system? Let me know in the comments below. What do you think Lady Audley's true crime was? And was she ever really mad? Until next time, keep reading like a detective, and remember, every crime story is a story about power. This is Crime and Civilization, where fiction is evidence and the state is always on trial.